Hello, I'm Johnny Levan, and today we're going to talk about the JM Jockey Pump Controller. We're going to talk about troubleshooting and some of the possibilities of things that could go wrong and how to repair that. Before we can talk about how to troubleshoot, we need to understand how the Jockey Pump Controller works. Power is brought into the Jockey Pump Controller to the top of the isolating switch, disconnect switch here. Goes through the isolating switch, disconnect switch, and into the contactor as well as to the primary side of the control transformer. The power then leaves the secondary side of the control transformer, goes to two places. First goes to the selector switch, the handoff auto selector switch, and over to the pressure controller, the pressure switch in this unit. Whichever of these two devices calls for the pump to run will determine when the pump starts and stops. The handoff auto selector switch has an off position which turns the jockey pump off, as well as turning off the disconnect will turn off the jockey pump. When you move the selector switch to the hand position, the pressure control is bypassed. Voltage is fed from the transformer directly to the HOA switch, through the HOA switch to the coil of the contactor, causing the contactor to energize and pull in. That causes your pump to run. This is known as the manual operation of the control. For automatic operation, there is a pressure switch located inside the controller, and you can adjust your cut in and cut out pressures based on these two knobs at the top. This one determines your cut out pressure. This one determines the differential for the cut in. By adjusting those two, you can determine exactly where the pump needs to start and stop. Move your selector switch to the auto position, and that brings the pressure switch into the loop to control the voltage going to the coil. Again, in the auto position, if you want the pump to stop before it reaches the upper set point of the pressure switch, just move the selector switch to the off position. Okay, now for a little troubleshooting. If the jockey controller does not run when placed in the hand position, of course you want to make sure that your isolating switch is closed, but you want to determine if the problem is in control wiring or the coil of the contactor. By taking a voltmeter, you can measure the voltage on the coil connection as shown here. For the contactor, if that coil voltage reads 24 volts AC, then you have the proper voltage to the coil is just not energizing to pull in, and you probably need to replace the contactor. If you do not have the voltage, your selector switch was in the hand position, then you may either have a failed transformer, the transformer reset may have tripped for some reason and needs to be reset, or you may have a problem in the selector switch contact block itself. Tracing your voltage through those devices will allow you to troubleshoot that. Okay, now let's say that the pump does not run in automatic. Again, we go to the HOA selector switch, make sure we're in the auto position, and if we want to quickly check the coil and contactor, flip it over to the hand position. If it works in hand and doesn't work in auto, that tells us that the contactor and coil and transformer are good. It's between the auxiliary contact on the HOA switch and the pressure switch that's not making connection. So we follow those devices. We can actually measure our voltage both at the contact block on the HOA switch, as well as taking the cover off and measuring the voltage at the terminals inside the pressure controller. Another problem we need to take a look at is the broken isolator switch operator. Many times you will see this operator has pulled away from the enclosure, and that means this disconnect needs to be replaced. In order to replace the disconnect, we take a small screwdriver, loosen the clamps on both sides to holds those in place. Then if we take a slightly smaller screwdriver, insert it into the hole that you see in the connecting and push down, we'll be able to release the disconnect switch and contactor from the DIN rail, slide it out and raise it up, and it will come free. Of course, putting in the new one, we will assemble the new one, put the top portion on first. One other thing to consider is if the disconnect switch trips, it may be due to an adjustment on the disconnect switch itself. You'll find a small adjusting area here with numbers around the dial. These numbers correspond to the full load current of your motor. You want to select the full load current rating based on your motor nameplate, and that will be the overcurrent trip position that you would use for that particular unit. Okay, that pretty much sums up the problems we've seen in the controller, and if you have any further questions, of course, contact the factory and we'll be glad to assist you. Thank you so much for using Joslyn Clark JM Jockey Pump Controls.